this is Shannon. Welcome back to my channel where you will find all things art. Today we are doing this cheetah on Strathmore Tone Blue Mixed Media paper. It is 9 by 12 and we are just going to use charcoal to create this. Alright, I transferred the drawing onto the paper with a white graphite transfer paper. I don't like to draw on the paper. I don't like a lot of erase marks, so I like to draw it on a piece of tracing paper and transfer it over with the white graphite transfer paper. That way you don't have a bunch of smudge marks or things that could show through your work. With charcoal, I think the best thing to do when you look up a reference photo, get any reference photo, but switch that reference photo to black and white before you start to draw with graphite, because it just makes it easier, because you're basically only focusing on values. And as I'm doing here, I was darkening up the shadow and then like spreading it out with a little makeup brush. It's like an eyeshadow, one of those cheap ones nobody uses for anything. So I used that. It makes for a nice smooth blend, but it picks up a lot. So I felt like it was lightening it up too much as I was using it. So I eventually switched that out for a blending stump, which I feel like works a little bit better just because it doesn't pick up quite as much of the charcoal. I just kept having to go over the charcoal to make it darker because it was just kind of picking it up. It's got almost like an eraser-like feel. So when I finally stopped being lazy and go downstairs to get my blending stumps, it works a little bit better. And I am just focusing on values here. I'm not doing really a lot of the detail, kind of mapping out a little bit, but for the most part, just putting in like where most of the darker areas are and blending it out so that it gives it a nice darker surface base to work with when I start going over it with the white. And charcoal is a great way to practice your values because it is such a quick medium. So, this probably took me an hour and a half, 2 hours, which is pretty quick for something so realistic. So charcoal is a great medium to like lay stuff down quick just to get a feel for your values so that you know exactly what you're aiming for with those. And charcoal is pretty versatile. You can, darken it back up and go over it with the white again for quite a bit. It will eventually start to not want to work because the paper will get a little bit smoothed out too much and things don't want to stick as well. So eventually it'll start to build up and be an issue, but it takes a little bit, and as long as you're not pressing too hard to wreck the tooth of the paper, it takes a while. So you've got a lot to work with in order to practice with that. I think I got this reference photo from pixabay.com. It's where I get a great majority of my reference photos. And I don't know where it came from that you should draw or paint by memory, but that elitist artistic perspective is a little bit unrealistic. I don't know how anybody can possibly remember all of the fine detail in a picture like this or anything with a lot of fine detail like that. You're not going to remember all of that. And you might be able to do something that you've done a lot that's going to look good, but you won't have the same level of detail as if you have an actual photo to work from. So I always look up a reference photo. Pixabay and Unsplash are both free. They've got a bunch of free websites. They've got a bunch of free reference photos that you can use, and I use them all the time. Thousands and thousands of pictures. I would link this, but I actually cannot find it now. So there's either too many for me to find it or it was taken off. I'm not really sure. But they do have other pictures of cheetahs that would look just as good. Just remember to switch it over to black and white so that you're only focusing on your values. It makes it a lot easier to make something black and white from a black and white photo. And you'll notice I go over and I don't like the way it looks. I'll smooth it out a little bit and I'll go back over it. And I didn't have any problems building up extra layers when I did that. And there's a couple of times that I switch the texture on the surface that I'm because I don't like the way it was turning out, so I switched the way I was doing it just to try to get something different. And it's a great way to practice those different ways and experiment to see what works and what doesn't work. It is like surprising how dark the ear gets, but I really had to build that up. I had to go over it a couple of times with the softest black just to try to darken that up because I just couldn't get it dark enough. There, and with all the little details around the ear, there is a surprising amount of detail around the ears. The more that you practice, the more that you'll see all the fine, tiny details that there are in pictures. There is a lot of work on the ear. I spent quite a bit of time on the ear because there's just little tiny hairs all the way around the ear, and then there's the longer wispy hairs that go through the ear. So there's just a lot going on for something that you wouldn't think that would be that important, but if you don't do it right, it will not look right. And right here, I had a hard time getting the texture to look like the reference photo. It kind of has like this sweep forward that I was having trouble mastering. And eventually I kind of get it, but it looks pretty good in the end, but it still isn't exact to the reference photo. But as an artist, you have the opportunity to choose how you want to represent the reference photo. So I didn't like the way it originally turned out, so I did go over it a couple times, but I was happy with the final picture. So and all of this fur, it just kind of overlaps, and you got to make sure you keep it all about the same length. And if you don't overlap it, it's not going to look right. You're going to have just a bunch of lines everywhere, and it's not going to look right. And I feel like it is a ton easier to go through and do all of the black dots first and then build the fur around it so that it makes it look like fur all the way around it. It just really works out well that way. And I'm still messing with that because I wasn't liking the way the texture was turning out. I did the same thing with the hair at the base of the neck there. It was looking too long, so I had to try to switch it up a little bit. But that's the great thing. If it doesn't look right, you just keep going. Just keep changing it. See, I'm darkening it up here again and just going back over it again, trying to get that texture the way I need it to be. Eventually, I did start having a hard time getting the white charcoal to stick there, but it still turned out all right. I darkened up the body so that it would be a little bit less in your face, I guess, so that it wasn't like the focal point. I mean, there's some shadow there anyway, but I don't want it to be the main focal point, so I wanted the face to be a little bit brighter and stand out just a little bit more. But you always want the body because the floating head look, it's hard to pull off. And this fur does take a while. You have to be careful, make sure that you're not making uniform fur, and make sure that it's overlapping, because if you don't do that, it's not going to look right. And if you're not great with fur, you can practice just like a case study of the fur itself before you get into a full project. That way you have it down before you start. I'm not much of a fan of that, though. I always go into the full project, but I learn every time I do a project. I learn from it and learn different ways to do it next time. A little bit of highlighting, fixing the nose. I'm still messing with that fur at the base of the neck. And this is basically just final touch-ups to make sure the texture is right, little areas, highlights, making sure everything is good. And although my reference photo did not have the pupil of the eye, I opted to put one in there because I just did not feel that it looked right. So this is our final piece. I think it turned out quite well. If you liked this, please give a thumbs up and subscribe to see more videos. Thanks.